Welcome back to another podcast, our weekly podcast in transformation leadership. I am Sean Ennis, one of your hosts, and I'm joined today, as usual, with my partner in crime, David Soden. And today, stunningly enough, we're talking about AI again. It is the topic of transformation of our generation at this point, or at least recent transformation. So, David, what do you want to talk to us today about?
Yep. So for those of you that follow me on LinkedIn, I have a daily post addressing different topics by different verticals. And what I also try to do is keep up with the latest and greatest news. And so this article is talking specifically around industrial, something called context engineering that we'll get into in just a minute. And we're going to juxtapose that with some other industry articles talking about in this Daily Mail. You know, we talked a little bit about this last week where, sorry about spinning around on you, all these pop-up ads and everything goes along for the ride. But the gist of this story of this is that college students coming out of school are really having a hard time landing and getting jobs, even though they got a full-on data science degree. So the pivot or the correlation between this other article that my LinkedIn article was based on is really around context engineering versus prompt engineering. And so if you're not familiar, just breaking this down in the most simplistic way, and we even have another deck here for you. And before I get too far away or into it, I wanted to bring up the QR code. So in case that you guys want to get a hold of this deck, look at it for yourself outside of the podcast. Scan that, and then you'll be able to, link to this presentation that I'm showing here today. Well, I'll circle back at the end of the show here. We'll show the link again and talk a little bit about our website here. But essentially, if we look at this industrial specific use case, this is applicable whether you're in healthcare. It doesn't matter what vertical you're in. It's really about AI and how you prompt it. And I promised you an explanation about the difference between context versus prompt. So a prompt, you're most familiar with ChatGPT. You ask it a question, you get a response, right? You're doing a task. Now, if you are doing context engineering, you have the foresight of whatever problem is that you're trying to solve, but the intelligence of understanding that problem and its solution from beginning to its end and everything in the middle. It could only be as simple as 1, 2, 3, or it could be 1, 5,001, right? So it doesn't matter how many steps there are. The context is that big picture. And then the prompts multiple prompts make up what you're doing in the context. And so as you're developing the specific task, you essentially feed it the bigger picture and says, this is where we are. We're trying to solve this problem with this task. And that's the context part of the context engineering. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So let's look at this now, more specific use case where we've got $300,000 prompt engineer already fading. They're moving into this thing called context and tying it together with, if you're young and you're listening to this podcast and you're trying to figure out a way to break in where there's a need, you don't have to throw the degree out because you could still absolutely use it. But what you need to do is get over that initial hump because you're not going to get hired on with something that AI is already basically doing your job at. However, there's quality problems all over the news that everybody has, that they're trying to solve these problems. And this is no different here. So let me try to get to the next.
Real quick, I want to make the case, David, that this isn't just for people who are coming out of college.
Right.
This is, I know friends of mine in the tech industry, especially middle managers, are seeing their roles evaporate. As fewer people are needed to do the work because of AI, those people are getting eliminated, and therefore middle management is being eliminated. Here's something where perhaps you weren't hands-on in the past that you can get halfway to being hands-on. So you don't have to learn to code again. You need communication skills. And
Yep.
if you're a little bit further in your career than others, communication is probably something that you had to learn and figure out, and how you could explain somebody's job and what they need to do. Maybe your middle management career is a perfect in to be a context engineer.
This is true. And so, a lot of yous that are even not even in computer science or computer anything, you don't even need to code, because prompt engineering as a user, if you're just asking it AI to do something, you're already doing the prompting. It's really about, are you good at strategic planning? And if you are, and you understand a process from end to end, this might be an interesting path forward for you. And here, the slide in this particular use case, we're talking about a very lucrative prompt engineering job kind of going and evaporating, where this fundamental disconnect. Now, again, this is using industrial systems by way of example, but the key here is it's all moving, and everything's moving and shifting towards this context engineering, and the pain that is being experienced throughout the industry with failing AI initiatives and things not measuring up to where they need to be. The context of the prompt engineering, at least in my opinion, and Sean and I were having a very in-depth conversation about this earlier, is only a part of the problem. It's the measurability of the prompt at the prompt level. Did the prompt work? Did it have the expected outcome? Because when you stitch these all together in context of the full context engineered solution, if you're not measuring at every point along the path, you're not really quite sure how you got to where you got from a measurability standpoint. So you're not really quite sure maybe if the outcome is as effective as it could or should be. So I'm planting the seed for that early, maybe for another show down the road. But the bottom line is, if we look at what we got wrong, and again, this is talking about industrial AI, but this again applies to anything. If you look at the prompt approach, and if you're an expert about one particular thing within manufacturing or industrialization, and you're looking at the sensor telemetry data coming out of your production line, there are particular or specific prompts that you use. A company that I used to work with in the past that had some really good electronic and sensory data was ABB, or ABBA, I believe it was. They do, I believe, controllers and things of that nature for
IoT,
environmental systems and HVAC, commercial HVAC type based systems. Crushville Wake was a great customer for them. And so these are the types of use cases where, this type of thing really is starting to take off in those types of industries and specific settings. But the bottom line is there's hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of concurrent streams, especially for a company like Crush Wakefield. It's unbelievable the amount of telemetry data that comes through there. And so at the end of the day, you're getting maybe good, or what you think is good information. But if you do not have the full or big picture in mind, then you might be missing what's called metadata, pieces of information that describe the data in a little bit more verboseness. And AI is great at that if you give it some guardrails and say, correlate this information to what does it mean, or try to look into the crystal ball, but use it as supplemental information so that downstream you understand how you might use this information in good and interesting creative ways. But if you don't have the context of where you're going and what it needs to ultimately do, and understand what is the problem it's trying to solve, what story is it trying to tell to solve the problem, you're going to be having holes at each area along the way. Sean, do you have any examples of maybe non-industrial where you've seen this either in retail or in, I don't know, any number of maybe BFSI or something like that, where you could give analogy, like we're talking about sensor or telemetry data, or IoT. What about business processes or things of that nature?
Two use cases that I can think of. One, early in my career, I did a lot of telco, a lot, and monitoring networks as an example, and having different information. When I got into AI, it was if else if type of AI, and then we did. I did a lot of machine learning. If you go to SeanEnnis.com, you can see my AI journey because my blog is still there. I do video blogging now, as you could tell. But a lot of the journeys that I had in the past, specifically my tech journeys, are there around AI and machine learning. So understanding things like clustering on incidents. So when something breaks in the network, you have 15 different pieces of devices that all scream something different. And being able to tag them independently and what relationship they have to each other allow you to focus the vision of what's going on to a human. And explaining that with especially large language models is something that's amazing field right now. But number two, on IoT, I worked with a quick service retail client. And what we did for IoT is collect information on things like how often the oil was replaced, how often the warming drawer was rotating its inventory. And these are all things that you're like, oh, okay, that seems very innocuous. Well, the warming drawer, you could be giving stale food to customers who won't want to buy it, right? You're destroying your brand, and something that insignificant, but you're destroying a brand when you sell stale merchandise. And even worse, if you're not stocking it, then people are going to be like, where's the quick and quick service? So something as very innocuous as that. You train your people. Those people are doing their best. Having a good understanding of whether your training is working. I mean, we had this conversation right before we started the podcast. Yeah. Is like, how do you know that it worked if you're not measuring? And, having this data and being able to rationalize the data is the second part. Just having the data is not good enough. Today, you have to rationalize it. And I think that's what we're talking about here with context prompting, is asking a question with data under context so that you could get a good understanding of, where's the tree in this forest?
Yep.
And a lot of people, they assume that AI is all-knowing, all-smart, and then you just throw a whole bunch of data to it, and then miraculously insights are achieved. That does not happen.
It's impressive, but not that impressive.
Yeah. People are assuming, AGI is right around the corner. And I know people like talking about that all the time, but my experience is AI, at least large language models, are incredibly disappointing from an intelligence 99% of the time. And that 1% is really what separates the experts like us from the people who are not experts, because we know what the 1% is. And that's what a lot of these times we're trying to teach our audience, that 1%.
And speaking of the 1%, right on cue, this is a great segue into this topic right here. Blind spots, essentially, and industry expertise. Now, again, focused on industrial unique challenges that provide this context. For your industry, for your vertical, even for your task, might even be for your department or work stream specific to what it is that you do, because there's some secret to the sauce of what it is that you do that differentiates you from your competitors. And so these are the types of things in context that, if missing or not taken into account, when you start trying to throw AI into the mix, if you haven't already, and you're seeing challenges, look at your blind spots. That's like one of the first things to figure out. What are we missing? What is proprietary, unique to us? What does AI not have access to? And keeping the golden rule in mind, just because you can doesn't mean you should, especially if you're not using security conscious type of, implementation. So like you're using a private cloud LLM in some, I don't know, hyperscaler, but it's exposed publicly and it's connected to one of your proprietary data sources, you might have a problem down the road. Like, just saying, right? So bottom line is, yeah, go ahead.
We talk about this all the time, David. Use case is the value of AI. And what are you showing? What are you talking about here? If you want to be a leader, you know your use cases and you know how to implement your use cases in your industry.
Exactly. I couldn't have said that one better myself. And, if we look at this in the full context of the context engineer, as opposed to, say, a prompt engineer, there's some basic rules of success, or some formula. And you can read this right here on the screen. And so what Sean, starting with the end in mind, what Sean was really talking about in the use case tells a lot about scope, right? And so scope is and should be always the use case. But it starts with a good, clean definition. And that definition comes from having a holistic point of view. And this is really the key difference in what it is that you're doing. It's not just necessarily adding the better question, but it's that context of everything that goes into the decision process. A lot of times I think the best AI implementations are at the early stages when everybody sits around and says, hey, let's talk about this use case. Who does what? When do they do it? Is it working for us? If it's not working for us, what could we do to make it better? And sit there and iterate around all of this. So, maybe sometimes AI isn't the answer, shockingly enough, but sometimes it is. And it's not a full AI implementation. It's just solving this one little problem that's causing the everything to gum up in your process. And maybe just putting AI on that unsticks the gum, because you'll see this if you've ever done any type of, I think at the enterprise scale, Clonus or Celonis, I can never remember how to pronounce that. But in any event, essentially they do reverse engineering of processes to see how it happens. And you can watch Power Automate by Microsoft also has this too with their process monitor. And you feed it the telemetry information of everything that happens within your process, and it shows you a flow chart, a really nice visualization of your entire end-to-end procedure or process and how it deviates, your standard deviations, where the exceptions are, where the outliers are, what causes them to go out of the main path, and all of these decision tree based uncovering all of this. This becomes your context engineering blueprint or roadmap. So if you haven't done, and you're implementing AI and you're even struggling with context engineering, go 2 or 3 steps back into your process review. And everybody always thinks AI is chatbots. And 80% of the heavy lifting, if you look at an iceberg and you think about it, the iceberg sits above the water, but it's supported by 80% that sits underneath the water hidden. AI is very much the same way. The chatbot is the UI UX. The intelligence, the logic, the large language model all sits underneath, behind, obscured and hidden. And so it's really about orchestrating all of these solutions end to end, getting that bigger picture and understanding that, hey, listen, sometimes you need to get in the submarine, go under the water, reverse engineer, see all the nooks and the crannies that make up, the tip of what it is that you're dealing with. And try to just move this forward. And so Sean was talking about, this is why you hire the experts. Sean, do you have anything else to add regarding context engineering and more along the lines of what makes the Big Four or Bain or McKinsey or any of those successful? Because that formula should honestly be part of the application I think that customers and companies should be using when it comes to context engineering. all of those rules, in my opinion, still apply. But what are your thoughts on all of that?
I think prompt engineering is a confusing concept that is causing new words like context engineering to come into play, because so many people like, Sean, I know how to prompt. I just take all the data, I throw it in there, and I ask a question. I'm like, that's not prompt engineering. I don't hear much engineering there. That sounds like you're prompting. So, I think context engineering, as you've defined it, as we've defined it right here, is what I would consider correct prompt engineering. And this happens a lot with technology in this industry, is people have a poor way of teaching technology, and marketing gets ahead of knowledge.
Yep.
So that people start doing things and not realizing they're doing it wrong. And instead of trying to correct people, which nobody likes to be corrected, we just invent another term that was really the original term. Maybe that's my opinion, but at the end of the day is, I find you have to have a plan. Engineering is about having a plan. You can't be an engineer if you don't have a plan.
That's true.
So that's what context is all about. What are you trying to achieve? And then, how do you link up all the things that you need? My wife jokes all the time. Anytime that I have a home project that I want to do, I get everything going. And then I thought of everything until I start hooking everything up. And then I always forget, how do I power this thing? Right? It's like there's so many dependencies. And if you forget one, it just won't work. So this is what engineering is all about. And if you don't have the context, what's going to happen is your AI is going to lie to you. And you won't even know that it's lying to you. One of the things that I try to tell people about prompting is you're asking a question to an AI and you're going into it like, hey, this is going to be cool. A lot of people take it from that perspective, but you have to understand from the AI perspective, it has a gun to its head.
Yep.
And it has to answer you and it has to make you happy. So anytime you talk to an AI, it is an interrogation session with you're the interrogator. And so when it tells you something under duress, you have to understand that it may be lying and it will do its best to convince you that it's right. So you may want to start with providing context to the AI, saying a role play. Okay, hey, you are a Bain management consultant. You are an expert in this field. And so you're immediately having it forget 98% of the context. And you are focusing the attention of the AI into one class of who you want to talk to. I tell people that all the time. If you want to start with prompt engineering, create a context of who you're talking to. Who are you trying to talk to? If you're trying to do development, hey, you are an expert Python engineer.
Yep.
When you give that context, you get it to focus and it will hallucinate way less. And to your point with this context, this is what context is all about. The more context you give it, the more likelihood you will get as an outcome. And if you expect to play with AI without an outcome, that's exactly what you're doing. You're playing. Nobody pays you to play.
Well, I think what you're describing is what I would call Ubu mode or Fido mode, right?
Yeah.
For those of you that watch movies, the sit Ubu sit piece that comes into there.
Good boy.
Out of the gate, your large language model is in Fido mode or Ubu mode, and it just wants to please you. And if you don't have good prompt engineering or context engineering, and as Sean was talking about, you're just prompting, with no engineering. On screen is a great visual. These are just specifics. They're still somewhat generic, but they are somewhat or slightly lended in the tools integration towards industry. But it really comes down to, and I don't think a lot of people think of this too, because I did want to touch base a little bit on that. All of the data that you're feeding into this, like, it has a life cycle. You need to also think about life cycle management on the data that you're feeding in, or life cycle management on the data that it has access to. So if you're, for example, going to a data set and you're feeding in a source of data, but you don't consider the life cycle management, then you're asking the AI to query your data source without a filter. You're just saying, give me whatever you've got in your data set. And if you don't consider the life cycle of what is germane, what is relevant, what is whatever, then you're going to get polluted context. And that is bad. That's the opposite side of too much of a good thing is now a bad thing. And so the tools integration is simply, everything that we've talked about earlier. This is what makes agents agentic when you start adding tools and the orchestration of all of that. So just keeping all of this in mind, these are the engineering components that you need to think through your mind's eye, or tell the people that are doing your AI, hey, are you doing end-to-end management? Are you thinking about the big picture? Are you looking at lifecycle management? Are you filtering the amount of information to make sure that the information going in is quality, or it's relevant to the use case, or to the ask, or to the task, or whatever? And I think, without going into too much of a tangent, the other thing to do is look for duplicated processes. If you're doing the same thing in different use cases using different pieces of the AI, we've already solved these problems when programming with object-oriented programming. Think of objects as being there, and you don't need to make everything all over again. You programmatically can use what's already there. I'm not going to get into all the technicals of the programming, but the point is doing it smart. And as you get into this context engineering, you'll start seeing that maybe even within your use case, you're doing the same thing 3 different times along that path of whatever it is. Don't create 3 instances of it. Just call that one instance again and again. So this is the engineering aspect that I just wanted to touch base on here real quick. The other thing that we wanted to get into is more of the real world industrial context of this. This is pretty much everything that we've talked about here before. But again, in context to industrial, you can apply this even into medical. So you've got the predictive maintenance, you've got quality control. I can't go into this enough. I said this on the onset, going back to the measurability. If you're not measuring each component of AI or activity of AI, then you're not engineering again, and you're not going to get to quality control because you haven't measured and you don't have baselines from which to measure from. Again, production optimization, the context, the end-to-end solution. So, Sean, talk about BFSI, talk about healthcare, talk about retail. It doesn't matter, but just help folks to round this out, even though it helped to use the use case in a vertical to help explain or frame some of this. But I wanted to just broaden this out to say this is more of a template of success than it is specifically about any one particular vertical. How might this apply in other areas?
I mean, BFSI immediately go to fraud and fraud prevention and fraud detection,
Yep.
Right? The old joke of enough drunk monkeys making Hamlet, that is the fraud use case, because there are plenty of drunk monkeys out there. And they only have to be right once. Fraud is a fitting algorithm. You have a whole bunch of people trying to fit into your attack surface, whatever that may be. So security in general is great for this because it's a large quantity of data where you want to understand the intent of the person who's doing things. And 99% of your usage traffic is people. 95% of people, they're following the flow you expect. how to tell the difference between, frankly, my elderly parents trying to follow something that is outside their generation and a fraudster trying to take advantage. It's really hard to tell the difference. And, you don't want to abuse the poor elderly who are just trying to fit into their world, right? And calling them a fraud. So this is a difficult problem, and AI is exceptional at it from an industrial perspective of being. You kind of talked about this from that aspect.
Yep.
These problems are pretty common.
Yep.
Where 99% of the traffic all looks the same, and you need to find the needle in the haystack. Before, you would pay data science engineers a lot of money to create a machine learning model. And now with context engineering and somebody who understands the use case, who understands the industry well, can take advantage of it. Now, right now, founders are getting tons of money speaking the two powerful letters of the English alphabet right now, A and I, to be able to solve any problem. And how they do that is they talk about the problem. They talk about contextually how AI can solve it. And then they talk about the value you can get from solving that problem. And that's how they are being greenlit. And you could throw a rock and hit 15 startups right now who are all claiming that they're the new AI darling.
Yeah, and if you're using AI or you're looking to use AI and you want to get into this to set it up right, there's some skills. And even though this is being called the skill gap, this is really kind of more of a holistic, big picture skill that you might want to consider incorporating, if not all of this, into what it is that you're doing in your business. Now, understand the last. I always like to start with the last for some reason. Everything here is pretty much straightforward, but for those of you seeing the ML, which is machine learning, which was really, really popular before AI that you know it today, although machine learning is intrinsically part of the evolution, but nonetheless, there are certain use cases still where machine learning is or can be applicable or used, but that is like the action. The most important thing, and this is what Sean and I have kind of harped on a little bit in this entire presentation, is the domain expertise. This is what defines context engineering. You really need to know what you're doing within your business or whatever problem you're trying to solve. You need to know it end to end. You have to have that domain expertise to guide the engineers that are creating whatever it is. And so even though you're not writing the code, this is the systems integration. It leads to the data architecture. You might not be doing the coding. You might just be speaking in plain English, but you say that, hey, we use this system to log this information. This is where the data is. You're going to need to get it from this system. Then we do X. Well, that information for some reason is still kept in a spreadsheet, and we maintain that over here. And so all of this information has to come together to tell this full story. And then you need your data architects and blah, 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 blah. I mean, I can just go on and on and on. But, we did our best here to try to at least cover all of the main pillars. Sean, is there anything that stands out that maybe was forgotten, or any word of advice to anybody that is looking at this, either possibly freaking out saying, oh, we've missed this component or piece? What, in your opinion, if you had to pick two, are the most critical?
I mean, the first, I really have been imploring my family and friends to understand that the AI revolution is well underhand. The genie is out of the bottle. There's no purpose fighting it, right? The best thing we can do is co-opt it. And that is showing how you can solve problems with it and not against it. Right. So this is a perfect example of that example where what you need to do to show value in today's corporate America is understand the business and role that you're in so well that you can apply the context of what makes you smart and use a large language model of your choice to produce X's of data, 3, 4, 5X of an outcome because of it. And that you're so good at it, you could teach other people to do it. You're so good at it that you could constantly create new examples of where it provides value. And that context engineering, in my opinion, is how you do that. And understanding that the more specifics you give to AI, the more accurate outcome you're going to get.
And this slide is just simply showing you the formula for the success of how you might want to think about or break this down into its counterparts. It starts with the prompt engineering. We've harped a little bit about the context engineering in this podcast, but we didn't get too much into the information architecture, but we alluded to it. And this is really part of the key piece, right? It's the largest area or surface area of the delivery of the implementation. And so this is really this big picture or end-to-end solutioning for coming up with what you need to understand with regards to the technical architecture stuff. Kind of wrapping up and in closing with this, here's some statistics that were taken. We're looking at the evolution of roles within, an industry, and 47% are experiencing, at least in the industrial average, a downtime reduction, which means much more productivity. They're able to capture things earlier, quicker, probably because of the telemetry, but more importantly, seeing these and learning from these anomalies from the sensors that are coming out of these IoT devices. Overall, you're getting a 38% quality improvement. And this is the key crux of this. And this is where the artificial intelligence accelerates and makes humans superhuman. This is where the human being understands the process end to end. They are the context engineer, right? And this is the outcome. This is the measurability. 85% of the decisions are now being made with confidence. Is it 100%? No, because artificial intelligence is based on flawed human intelligence. And until we get to the point where AI is self-learning, which is AGI, essentially what we're talking there, this percentage is going to remain under 100%. It'll be an interesting world, to say the least, of a day when this decision confidence goes to and can be 100%. I would say both scary and lots of things. Just depends on how, I guess, whoever it is in the hands of how they implement it. But, the core principle here is industrial AI success in the context of quality, better algorithms, highly sophisticated outcomes and engineering outcomes. But really, we're attributing all of this into the context of the engineer who, kind of mastermind or put all of this together. Sean, any final or closing thoughts that you have?
No. Again, I would implore everybody to think, what is your role? What is your value? How can you change those two to your advantage with AI? Because that is going to be the difference between you having success in your career and being replaced by somebody who can. Okay. And again, I'm not here to tell you that I invented rain. We're here trying to teach you how to use an umbrella.
So if you ever wanted to reach out to Sean or I, you can go to transformationleaderspodcast.com, click on host, and you can connect with either of us here on LinkedIn. We also have all of our episodes are listed here, so you can listen to both the current episode as well as any past episodes. And down here at the bottom, if you want to have a one-stop shop to reach Sean and I with one message, go ahead and fill out our form, and both Sean and I will get access to it there. So come join us every Wednesday at 12 o'clock noon Eastern Standard Time, where Sean and I will talk about the next iteration of whatever's hot within the news. But until next time, we'll see you later. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.